So thank you all for coming. Just to let you know, I am recording this so that others can see this who are not in this time zone and couldn't attend today. So we've got a great panel. We're going to start off. So first off, my name is Cameron Miller. I'm a professor at Syracuse University. I'm very interested in platforms, ecosystems, and digital transformation. And this session came about from Andy Wu and I talking about what can we do to try to extend what is going to be a theme for the STR division at this academy, which Deepak Samaya has come up with, was around digital transformation. So we wanted to have a touch point around this earlier in the year to kind of get the excitement going for this theme. Obviously, there's lots of people interested in this. It's affecting our lives now through AI. We've seen digital transformation, kind of rolling out over the last, couple decades, hitting different industries at different times. So we've got to a point where we actually have a massive research that's starting to make some headway, but lots of opportunity to do a lot more insightful work. So what I wanted to do with this is to get several folks that are engaged in this area to discuss some of their research, some of their ideas going forward, what they think the research opportunities are, and if we have time later on, even how we can bring some of these ideas into the classroom, right? Because as things are moving fast, students are asking questions around this stuff, yet we don't have a textbook that's got 3 chapters on it, right? So we're gonna, as this moves fast, we need to move faster as researchers and as teachers. So I thought this would be a very timely session. So we have 3 great panelists. The first one here that I'm going is actually not here. It's Nathan Furr from INSEAD. Nathan's got a PhD from Stanford. He's very, he's done a lot of work on digital. He's just released a book recently that might be interesting about uncertainty. But he had a conflict. So we'll play a snazzy video he set up. And then we'll move to our next panelist, Manav Raj. He's got a PhD from NYU. He's a professor now at Wharton. He's doing a lot of really interesting work. And if you keep your eyes out, a lot of this stuff should be coming across the pipeline pretty soon, I think. And then our last presenter will be Richard Wang from Babson. Him and I are co-authors and known each other for a long time. He's doing a lot of interesting work around a digital transformation and ecosystems, some of it with me. So he's going to talk about that and kind of how to think about classic strategy issues and tying these things together. And then after these presentations, the remainder of the time, which will be kind of the bulk of this, we'll have a Q&A, and we can discuss research topics, research gaps, what things you're looking for, teaching, whatever you might want that could create some value for you. We all have different backgrounds. There's a number of people in this room that are doing really interesting work in this area, so I think we can have a very lively discussion. With that, I'm going to start out by sharing my screen and playing a video of Nathan's stuff. If it's not if you can't hear it or if it's not clear, just please somebody yell out to me and let me know. Okay. So I'm going to get to the screen, share, and then I'm going to turn this up and let Nathan take off. Now I don't know what he's going to say, so you can send that email to Nathan Furr at INSEAD.
I'm not hearing any audio, Cameron.
Oh. Oh. Okay, hold on a second. Are we not hearing audio?
You might have to stop sharing, and then when you share, you have to click on share audio. There's like a button on there, maybe.
Great, thank you, Scott. That's a fabulous. Okay. Of course, I would know that it was going to happen to that. But doing digital transformation, and we have trouble doing anything digital. So share sound. So Scott is glad you were here.
Okay. I know that from many of my own mistakes in front of my students. So that's how I learned to do that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try it again, and if you can't hear it, just yell out.
Different screen.
INSEAD.
Yep.
You're showing the wrong,
Hello,
sharing the
everyone.
wrong screen
Yep.
now.
Thank you for being here.
All right, I have mini screens. Thank you.
Good news though, I could hear Nathan, so that's, you know,
Right.
we're getting closer.
All right, now y'all see Nathan?
I'm Nathan Furr. I'm a professor of strategy at INSEAD, and I'm excited to talk to you about my perspective on AI and digital transformation. It's a really critical topic for us as scholars because it's become very high profile in the practitioner world. And the question is, how do we wrestle with that from a research and teaching perspective? As scholars, we do research, and most of us also have to teach. So how do we think about it? I'm excited to share with you my viewpoint. Now, I think it's a good place to start to reveal my bias or my priors. So I teach strategy. I see myself as a technology strategy scholar. I did my PhD work at Stanford with Kathy Eisenhart, although most of my work is quantitative in nature. But let me just give you a few examples of my work to help you understand the way I see the world. So I like to look at technology and how it evolves. So for example, I've done some work on the solar photovoltaic world, and I've asked the question, why is it that firms choose different technologies when they enter that industry? And what we found in some work with Rahul Kapoor was that the availability of complementary assets in the ecosystem led diversifiers to select lower performing technologies they could quickly commercialize, and startups to choose technologies with higher performance trajectories, but without complementary assets in hopes of creating a competitive advantage. And then I looked at how do firms stay on the cutting edge of the technology? What leads them to adapt their perspective? And it tended to be the ability to draw on diverse knowledge and perspectives from the team to be able to keep updating your technology to keep it closer to the frontier. And then, of course, when a dominant design does emerge and there's a shakeout, what is it that provides a buffer to a firm to help them survive that kind of extinction event? Likewise, I've also looked at this question of what we call hybrid technologies, which is really about, if you look between technology generations, let's say the automobile, between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles, you often see this hybrid thing, which is a recombination of the two technologies. Now, some scholars in the field think those are a waste of time and a trap, but what we argued is that they could be a stepping stone to the future technology. And what we found that was interesting, by the way, is a lot of times incumbents are able to steal from the future, steal performance advantages from that future technology in the form of their hybrids. And then, more recently, an article that argues that technology discontinuities aren't necessarily deterministic, that it's really a function of, what's the performance trajectory of the mature technology, how much could the new technology improve, and how quickly will it mature, and this idea of what we call technology counteroffensive, this idea that it might sometimes be rational to try to extend your technology in the face of an uncertain technology discontinuity. So that gives you a background for how I see the world. I very much see firms and strategy as intertwined with the world of technology. So that leads me to the problem of AI and digital transformation. Maybe I can give you a site for your future work. I wrote an article with Pinar Ozkan and Kathy Eisenhart about what is digital transformation anyway. And the essence of that article was that the challenge for us as scholars is that digital transformation doesn't fit easily into any of our strategy theories. It kind of spans them in terms of level of abstraction. So, whether it's, very detailed or very macro, but it also is very broad. So we need to think about how do we get an anchor or at least some ground on which we can do some productive research that both addresses the issues in the field, but also allows us to get published and make a contribution. So what we do in this article is we try to highlight, well, what's different about digital transformation? Because, and the same could be said of AI transformation. There are some things that are different, and there are some things that are the same. One is that digital transformation brings down barriers. So that can be barriers to entry, barriers to transaction, barriers to interaction, barriers to scale. So what this little picture is demonstrating, because, I'm at INSEAD, I'm based in Paris, that kind of scale of a physical brick and mortar store is relatively small compared to the scale that is possible in an online store. Now, we've known that for a long time, but it's really taking the implications of that seriously. How does digital transform the scale? How does it bring down these barriers? So wrestling with those kinds of questions. But it's not just scale issues, it's changing behavior. So if you look at, say, how consumers look for things, we tended to use to look for brands. We talked about Kleenex or Xerox or those kinds of things. Whereas if you actually look at how they search for things online, they tend to search not in terms of brands or products, but in terms of needs. So I need flexible shipping, or I need a sustainable office lighting, not looking for Philips. And so there's a lot of kind of change happening that is hard to see on the surface. Now, I think we have the tools to wrestle with that, but I think we need to think about where do we want to make a contribution with our research. So in this article that was in the Global Strategy Journal, we said there are 3 core tensions on which you could productively anchor research. One is a shift from a world of products to a world of platforms. Now, lots of work has been done in this space. That's fabulous. The second is a shift from a world of firms to a world of ecosystems. And then the third is going to be a shift from a world of people doing work to the tension between people and tools. So let me just say something about that quickly. Tension 1, what do I mean by products versus platforms? I mean, it's very interesting to me. If you go back and you remember eBay was kind of, and PayPal, and the era of like the first kind of big scale digital platforms enabled by the internet that we began to talk about. It's interesting, you go back and you see Peter Thiel and Max Levchin talking about PayPal. They don't even use the word platform. It wasn't even a word that was really in use much, even though platforms are an old idea. And they used instead the word product. And that's because we lived mostly in a world of products, and that is where you make something and you sell it. Whereas, as you know, platforms are very different. They have a different set of dynamics, a different business model, where you essentially are connecting and transacting. And by the way, I should be clear, we use the word platform very differently. So in the digital world, sometimes we talk about platforms more like architectures. I like to think of that as the map of how all the pieces go together, and that has value. So we think about, say, operating systems as architectures, or a lot of times in the IT world, they'll talk about architecture by which they bring together all the kind of digital services. And I see those as a little different from the exchange world of platforms. To me, architectures are much more out of the world of engineering. If you go into the engineering building at a university, they'll be talking about the architecture, and you get efficiencies out of those architectures. Say, here's a Tesla architecture. It's a very different map of how the components of wheels and engines and power go together. But by designing an architecture and reusing the architecture, you get efficiency. And so the primary drive of those kinds of platforms are about being efficient. Whereas if you moved over to the economics building in the university, what do they talk about? They talk about markets. They talk about exchange. And so one of the other ways we see platforms really impacting the world is this growth of platforms and why does it matter? Platforms for exchange, they really benefit, as you know, from network effects. So, on the left, we're talking more about supply side economies of scale. On the right, we're talking more about demand side economies of scale. And, this shift is immensely important. I don't have to say it as much as I used to, but, when we're talking about this kind of exchange-oriented platform, it's this network effects, learning cycles, coordination benefits, data that are really quite powerful. Now, back when Feng Zhu and I wrote this article in 2016, 60 of the world's largest 100 companies were earning most of their revenue from platforms. I'd say it's even more. today, and that these platforms are incredibly powerful. So strategy has dealt increasingly with what a platform is, how platforms nurture an ecosystem of complementers, platform governance. But one of the questions we're going to have to continue to wrestle with, I believe, is how do you, as a non-platform company, navigate a world that is increasingly dominated by platforms, and not just platforms in a single industry. If we look at the big tech companies today, these are platforms that are spreading out horizontally across industries, and then commoditizing vertically within an industry, the other players within an industry. So this will continue to be a major place in which to anchor our research on digital transformation and AI transformation. Now, one of the mistakes I think we make is to say that platforms encompass everything there is to say about digital transformation. I don't think that's true. I think there are other major shifts. So another place in which to anchor your research is in the shift from a firm doing everything alone to an ecosystem of contributors, complements and components that contribute to the ability of an innovation to create value for end users. And why is this happening? Well, again, digital drives down the barriers to connect and transact and interact. So that means that components or products or industries even that were once separate and high transaction costs to bring together, those transaction costs have come way down. So that, like a topic like the connected car, which we could never even imagine before, that's now become one of the biggest categories at the Consumer Electronics Show, because digital has brought down those barriers to connect, transact, and interact. So that means more players are relevant, and that ecosystem, again, what are the components and complements necessary for an end user to get value, that has become really important and relevant. So where that ecosystem comes from, how it evolves, all those kinds of pieces continue to be things that we've loved talking about as strategy scholars, but I would say will continue to be more important in a digital world and an anchor for your research. And then lastly, I would say this tension between people and tools. You know, it's easy to, in our AI-driven world, to say that, oh, AI will replace, let's just say you can become famous for saying AI will replace everything in 5 years. AI is bigger than electricity or fire and all those kind of things. But I think we need to be really thoughtful as scholars about what it really means, because, we're strategy scholars, right? What's the essence of strategy? The essence of strategy, we study why does one firm do better than another, and the essence of that is either low cost or differentiation. So the tension between people and tools is that if we think about a tool like AI is great at making sense of large amounts of data, which we as people are not good at. So how do we differentiate? How are we different? What are the social and emotional jobs to be done that AI cannot do? Or let's think about the tension between the tool as it's presented to us and our innate humanness, our fear of something new, or our distrust of algorithms. So there are strategy scholars today, and we mentioned those in the Global Strategy Journal paper, who are looking at the tension between when an algorithm provides a better recommendation than the expert, but the expert rejects that because they trust their own kind of latent heuristics. What is that dynamic? How do we design solutions for it? How do we overcome that? And so to me, this is a rich area to study. And of course, AI is a fabulous area in which to study that. And so let me just sum up my perspective. I would say that if you want to do research on AI and digital transformation, which I think is fabulous to do, because it doesn't fit in nicely into any one strategy theory, it's important to say, where do I want to anchor it so that I can speak to some of my colleagues in a way they care about, but also address this massive shift that's going on in the broader world. And of course, I talked about this tensions between products and platforms, between firms versus ecosystems and people versus tools. I do think that AI and digital, though, I just want to back up 1 second and raise our level of analysis. I think something bigger and more fundamental is happening, and that is a deeper challenge for the field. Technology has always been a part of an organization. Maybe the technology to manufacture something, or maybe we think about information technology. But it's always been kind of on the side in our study of the firm, or typically, I should say. So for example, inside a typical organization, you had your IT department and they handed out laptops and made the printers work. But as we move deeper into an AI and digitally driven world, I would suggest that technology is moving to the core of organization and strategy. And I don't know if we're going to be able to study strategy without studying and understanding deeply technology. And if you want a cite for this, this is a chapter I wrote for the Oxford Handbook on this idea that technology is moving from periphery to core. As we think about digital, a lot of organizations today have chief digital officers, but they are also AI and digital are becoming the core of activity. What does that mean? And a great example of that is to think about Amazon and how Jeff Bezos in 2006 sent this email to all of Amazon that every interaction inside of Amazon had to happen via APIs, application program interfaces. And if not, you're fired. And what that did is it drove an unusual degree of modularity that has allowed that organization to scale. So that's an example of what I mean by technology becoming core. It's changing the nature of organization and maybe the nature of strategy. So that's a big question for the field. Finally, let me wrap up and just say, how do I think about teaching this? And when I teach this, I say you have to at least look at digital transformation and AI transformation through 3 lenses. One is a strategy and technology lens. So this is the what matters and how do I define and derive advantage. But it always involves organization change. So whereas the strategy lens is the 10,000 meter, where are the hills and where are the mountains and where are the valleys and how do I navigate those, the organization change lens is the 100-meter view. So imagine you're standing on top of a tall building made of glass and you're seeing all the teams and all the structure and all the organization, and how do they change? That's a relevant question as well. And then finally, I argue that you need the 1-meter view, which is the innovation process view, because nobody knows the one right way to do this, and so you have to test and learn your way forward. So I hope you find that helpful or interesting or sparks some thoughts and helps you put some structure on that. I will say, now that I teach AI transformation as well, everybody wants to do AI, but most people haven't done the digital transformation part that is required first, which is how do I actually get data, clean data, and use it, which is something we know well as scholars. Thanks again, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Take care.
All right. Well, thank you, Nathan, even though he's not here. That was quite enlightening. So I'm going to turn it over to Manav.
Excellent. Just give me 1 second to get this organized on my end. Cam, can you give me share access?
Yep, gotcha.
All right, can you guys all see that?
Yes,
excellent.
sir.
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Cam, for the invite. I'm really excited to be a part of this. My name is Manav Raj, and I'm an assistant professor in the management department at Wharton. When Cam reached out about this session, he gave us, a broad latitude to discuss something in the realm of digital strategy research we were excited about. So while Nathan took kind of a higher level approach in talking about digital transformation broadly, I'm going to be a little bit more narrow, and I wanted to highlight one emerging area of research that I'm super interested in, which is around the effects of AI on creativity and innovation. And, I'll just start by introducing the idea that, relative to previous generations of technology, one novel feature about AI is that it is creative. We see this in research, such as that by Arnold Doshi and Olivier Hauser, who have showed that AI can outperform humans in producing creative stories, or we also see it in alternate use tests, things like that we typically use to gauge human creativity. There's an interest in the public press in understanding how we can best harness AI tools to be creative, as you can see in these kind of articles. And further, we see already that AI tools are making an impact in innovative settings. So, for example, we know that AI is already shaping drug discovery. So AlphaFold is an artificial intelligence program developed by DeepMind, a subsidiary of Google or Alphabet, which performs predictions of protein structure. The idea behind this technology is that it has the potential to revolutionize drug discovery by rapidly predicting protein structures, which then allow researchers and drug developers to identify and target molecular causes of diseases. So the idea is this will hopefully accelerate the development of new drugs and reduce costs. And just a few weeks ago, we see that DeepMind CEO is suggesting that AI-designed drugs are going to be coming to clinical trials this year. Aside from drug discovery, we also see this happening in creative goods industries. So this piece of art here won the Colorado State Fair's art competition in 2022. It was covered in the New York Times because this is a piece of AI-generated art. So a professional visual artist using state-of-the-art image generation tools and playing around with a bunch of the prompts produced this. I like the subheadline here. I won and I didn't break any rules. But the encroachment of this technology into this creative space that is traditionally something that we think of as dominated by humans, art, quite naturally raised consternation. And we can see that with some of these Twitter reactions. So, someone saying this is pretty, shitty. We have someone saying that AI artwork is the banana taped to the wall of the digital world now. And then perhaps a little bit more existential, we're watching the death of artistry unfold right before our eyes. If creative jobs aren't safe from machines, what then is safe? What will we have? And I'll highlight something else that even now, right, as these AI tools are rapidly developing, the technology is very impressive. So this is a story I found really interesting. In 2023, this AI-generated song titled Heart on My Sleeve went viral. I had a video lined up at some point, but I don't really want to play around with the sound sharing. So I'd encourage you guys to check this out at some point. This is a song where all elements are AI generated. So it's AI created lyrics, AI created beats, AI created voices, meant to sound like a song written by Drake featuring The Weeknd. And as someone who probably listens to more hip hop music than maybe I should and more Drake music than I should, I can say this kind of blew me away when it came out. It was a pretty reasonable facsimile to what a Drake song sounded like. And while this blew up initially, it was quickly taken down from Spotify and understandably raised a bunch of questions. So, obviously one thing is who owns this IP? Should artists like Drake or The Weeknd be compensated for AI generated music that seems to build on things that they've done in the past? Further, I think there's a really interesting kind of conversation that's tied into what we saw in this Colorado State Fair as well, of what is the value coming from in these creative spaces. And The Atlantic had this really interesting article on this last year about how AI can't make music. And they talked to a professor in songwriting from Berklee College of Music who said there's a lot more to making a song than making it sound good. Truly successful music depends on the artist's particular voice and life experience, right? So if we have these AI tools that can create these really high fidelity, quite high quality pieces of creative art, but they don't necessarily have this voice and life experience, what exactly does that mean? How much do we enjoy that? Where is that actually creating value? Now, when we're thinking about these questions around how AI can affect creativity and innovation, luckily there's a nice research that already exists that we can leverage to start developing some insight around digitization and creativity. And this is a body of work I really like. Prior work suggests that digitization affects both the novelty and quality of innovation and creativity. So Joel Waldfogel and others speak about a golden age of creativity and in creative industries in particular. We can see this across these kinds of charts. There's more songs, movies, books, television shows than ever before. Barriers to entry are reduced. It's easier to create creative content than ever before. But we also know from other work that the nature of the work that's created is also being changed as well. So there are concerns that digitization may affect novelty, and this has been shown in studies of academic research or patenting, as well as kind of the novelty or creativity of creative content. So one of the papers I'm citing here is work done by myself and a co-author, Quan Kim, where we look at content novelty in the book industry, and we're finding preliminary evidence that increases in digitization are associated with declines in the average novelty of books. Now, if we dig into the research that's out there, we can start to identify why these changes may be occurring. And I'll highlight some of the potential reasons here and some of the research that's out here. One big thing that happens is digital technologies alter how we search for and evaluate ideas. And these changes to search are happening in terms of production. We can think about work done by Abhishek Nagaraj, among others, around Google Books and digitization of maps. And there's also changes to search in consumption. The way that consumers search for or recommended different products and evaluate products are changing as we move in towards digital markets. As I mentioned earlier, we see that there are lower barriers to entry and lower production costs. And there are new ways for firms to promote, sell, and distribute their products. And for such reasons, we see that firms are altering how they create and capture value. And I'll highlight, I think there's some really cool work here done by Cam and Richard, as well as Mary Benner and Joel Waldfogel, both looking at kind of the book industry and the music industry as well. So I think this gives us a really nice backdrop to start thinking about how digitization and digital technologies may affect innovation and creativity. But as we are trying to think about AI specifically and what we may expect moving forward, I think it's important for us to think about what is similar to and different from. How is AI similar to and different from prior digital technologies and shifts that we've seen before? And so I'll highlight a few. These are just kind of my interpretation of what we're seeing here. And I think the similarities here is that I expect we'll continue to see decreased cost of production, decreases in search costs that allow greater access to information. And for that reason, I think the research that we've already started to see would suggest that this is the case, is that AI technologies are going to allow for the production of more creative content, increased creativity in some ways. And like most technological changes that exist, we know that AI will revalue resources and alter firm strategies. Now, there are some differences, though, that I think are going to add some nice nuance to this literature and provide us with pathways to look into new things. So I think the biggest one, at least to me right now, is there's the broader range of applicability and the emergence of autonomy. AI is creative on its own in a way that digital technologies previously haven't, right? So if we think about the music industry, they were obviously affected by the emergence of digital tools and the creation of music, but we didn't necessarily have tools like Suno or Udio right now, where you could write a one-sentence prompt and have that create 10 different versions of a song for you, right? Something else I'll highlight is that we know that data is really important, as Nathan kind of mentioned at the end of his presentation, for using these kind of technologies and taking advantage of them. And so there's an element that we need to understand how data plays a role here. And there's also the black box nature of the technology, where very few people that I interact with, including myself, I'll say, have a really strong understanding of what exactly the technology is doing to produce its outputs. I'll highlight two other things quickly. One, it's a little bit unclear who's best positioned to take advantage of such tools, as we see research that suggests both increasing returns to expertise as well as kind of decreasing skill gaps with the emergence of AI. And as I mentioned, there's also ethical and social considerations, right? As we think about AI-generated goods and how we interact with and value them, understanding and thinking about AI entering domains that we generally associate with human work or human interaction may elicit some discomfort. And we may need to think about, how do we want to talk about this? How do we want to use these so that we can enjoy these goods as well? And so I'll just wrap up by talking about some of the high-level research questions that I'm excited about. The first is, and maybe this is a standard question or a really high-level one, but how does the use of AI tools alter innovative output and innovative processes? what I might suspect is that we might see more output, but the nature of the output itself might change, right? Is it going to be more incremental? Might we see more distant recombination? You can imagine that there are implications here at the innovation or at the firm level, but also implications at the field level, if we're thinking about things like diversity of innovation or creative content. Second, under what conditions is human AI collaboration most fruitful in innovative processes? And this is really thinking about what parts of production processes is AI better suited for, and are there certain human skills that we want to keep with the humans versus delegate to AI? What is more versus less complementary? And both of these kind of high-level questions are things that I'm working on. I'd be happy to talk more about questions that I'm studying here, in particular during the Q&A. I'll enter, again, this is something that I think is personally interesting to me. How do we respond as AI enters what we consider human domains? How can we mitigate algorithmic aversion for workers in creative spaces? And how can we also protect, creative workers and make sure that there is a space carved out for the human element in these kind of areas? And finally, there's questions around IP considerations, right? Who has IP rights for the data, and how might this affect incentives to create? That's really all I have. So I'm excited to kind of continue the conversation in Q&A. And thank you again, Cam, for giving us this opportunity to share these ideas.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I really appreciate it. So, Richard, I think I've made you a co-host, so you can probably just.
All right, let me see if I can share this. Please share screens. Okay, all right. So go share now. Let's see this screen. All right, share. Can everybody see it?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So, well, first of all, thank you, Cameron, and hello, everybody. My name is Richard Wang. I'm with Babson College. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. So, digital transformation, digital strategy, AI is perhaps one of the hottest topics we have today in the business world. When I talk to people these days, whether they are academics or they are practitioners or even parents of student applicants, when I tell them my research about digitization, digital transformation, they get excited and they start telling me their stories about their experience with digital business transformation themselves. So I'm so glad that AOM has picked up this topic of digitization, digital transformation, AI as a Meet a Phenomenon event theme. As digital technology disrupt how firms operate and compete, well, as strategists, we would naturally think about, oh, these new phenomena, are there new opportunities to do research, to develop new theories? As Nathan a moment ago pointed out that digital transformation AI, he said, does not fit nicely in any traditional strategy theory. It prompts us to go and dig deeper and search for new theories to explain the phenomena out there. But I like to take a step back and ask the question in an alternative way, in a complementary way. We can ask, how relevant are the classical strategy theories to the digital world? That means, in what ways and to what extent do classical strategy theories explain and guide managerial decisions in the digital age? Now, if we want to think about approaches to answer these questions, one approach could be to examine the classical strategies in the digital context. In doing so, we might be able to bridge the classical strategy literature with the digital strategy literature. Now, to be clear, digital strategy, digital impact cuts across many industries in many different ways. So it might be helpful if I focus on one particular industry context to illustrate my point here. Now, I'm going to stand on the shoulder of giant Manav, who shared with us some of the creative industry. So let's build on that a little bit. We know that digital technology has impacted music recording, for example, in a great way. In the upstream, traditionally, recordings are done in professional recording studios with all the high-end equipment. But nowadays, in the digital era, songs can be recorded outside of professional studios. For example, some of us may know that Billie Eilish, the pop star, recorded some of her most famous songs not in professional studios, but instead in her brother's bedroom in that way. And when we look at downstream, digital also affects how music are sold and distributed. In the old days, music is sold in albums or CD in record stores. But nowadays, we download our music, we stream our music. Some of us may be old enough to remember some of these iconic photo album covers. And it makes a lot of memories coming back to us. And when we saw these cover, it does entice us to buy these records out there. As the New York Times music critic Wang, sorry, I mispronounced his name, he pointed out that in the LP era, album art was a crucial component of marketing and aesthetic identity. Now the album cover, quote unquote, is just a tiny square on a screen. Now, what John says in his article, as strategists, we might see it as the classical differentiation strategy, that companies invest in their products to differentiate them, to entice consumers higher willingness to pay or higher willingness to purchase. So how do firms differentiate the products when the physical products becomes digitized? This problem is not bounded to just the recording music industry. For example, in the newspaper industry, back in the 80s and 90s, the newspaper in USA Today, they printed in full color across the board. But when the digitization happens, when people start reading newspaper on the laptops, on the iPads, this differentiator that USA Today had, that other newspaper wasn't able to do it through their technology capabilities or the financial resources. Now this differentiator become commoditized because all newspaper, when they display the news on the laptop screen, on the iPad screen, they can display them in color. So it's no longer an effective differentiator. As another example, and this one we may have more experience as strategy scholars and educators, is in higher education. Many schools, particularly the smaller school like liberal arts school, they differentiate from the larger schools with larger classes by emphasizing that they have small classes. There's much more interaction between the faculty and student. The bonding is tighter, it's much higher touch. But a few years ago, when we have to force to ourselves to teach online because of COVID, many of us may struggle to deliver that high touch level of differentiation online. So as digital technology is transforming us, we see this as a challenge. The context I've done some work on with Cam is in the book industry. Similar to the other media industry I just talked about, books also underwent a digital transformation when Amazon launched a Kindle e-reader and a Kindle shop back in 2007. Traditionally, the book publisher, they invest a lot in the physical attributes of their products. Some of us may know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. It's because the book publisher often emphasize the print quality, the paper quality, the binding, the cover of the books to differentiate the products on the bookshelf so that the consumer will more likely to buy those books. However, when books becomes digitized and are read on digital device like the Kindle, the traditional physical attributes of book, like the paper quality, the book binding, no longer can be an effective differentiator because all the experience that the user have are the interaction with the digital device. So in this way, how do the book publisher differentiate when physical books become ebooks? So in a paper that Cam and I worked on and published in SMJ last year, we have a few conjectures. The first conjecture is that do book publishers shift the differentiation emphasis to the non-physical product attributes? For instance, book content is a non-physical product attribute. Do they increase the creation of book contents? And when we start to ask this question, the natural question for strategists to ask is, who are more or who are less likely to shift? We conjecture that those publishers that pursue the differentiation strategy in the pre-digital age face this threat more acutely, and that would prompt them to do more content in the post-digital age. What are the conditions that may have more or less shift? Well, internally, publishers have different costs of producing content. And we would expect that those publishers that have higher costs in terms of producing content might be less likely to make bigger shifts. External demand also could affect the amount of shifts. For example, in the product category where there is a lot of space for creating more content, so we might see more content produced. But in product category that has a smaller, narrower, tighter niche, there may not be enough room to create more content. To examine our conjectures, Cam and I went to look for data sources in the Nielsen book scan and also from Amazon.com. We focus on the period before and after Amazon launched Kindle in 2007. And we focus on a particular set of publishers, those publishers that publish travel guidebooks. Now, why do we focus on this set of publishers? There are a few advantages to do that. The first is that these publishers are active in publishing both before and after Amazon launched Kindle. So that gives us the opportunity to compare the before and after changes. Secondly, travel guidebooks publishers often use physical attributes to differentiate their products. For example, including color photos of the destination, color maps, or even pull-out maps. They design the cover and bind the books in a robust way so it can be carried around a lot. So physical differentiation is a very effective tool for differentiating the products between one publisher and another. And another advantage of studying travel guidebook is that the product categories are easily defined. For example, we see a travel guidebook, let's say by Lonely Planet on Spain, we know the product category is defined by the travel destination Spain, or Canada, or South Korea, and so on and so forth. So this context gives us an easy and readily identifiable product categories to examine our conjectures. Our focus of the dependent variable is content creation. A moment ago, Manav says that digitization facilitates the creation of more content. So we look at content creation by looking at the number of guidebook titles by a publisher in a particular product category. An alternative measure we use is to count the number of pages in the main travel guide of that country and compare it before and after. The independent variable, the first one is about differentiation. Who are the differentiators? To measure differentiation in the physical space, we argue that when publishers include more color photos and maps, they will use thicker paper, and that will affect the print book density. That means the weight per dimension of the book. So we got the weight of the book, we got the dimension of the book. It allows us to calculate the density of the printed books. If they're high density, we call them the differentiator. To measure content costs, we look at this category of publishers. They have different content costs when they do more reviews on hotels and restaurants. If they do more hotels and restaurant review, the content production costs will be higher than if they focus their content more on the geography, the climate, the history of the country, for example. So we use the number of hotels covered in a guidebook as a measurement of high versus low content costs. And finally, we look at the product category by looking at each destination countries, whether they have a lot of tourist sites as defined by the number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. If there are more heritage sites, that means that there are more rooms for publishers to write about this category. The model we use is a simple negative binomial because we count the number of titles. We do a difference in difference. That means difference between physical differentiator versus non-differentiators before and after. And when we study about the internal cost of content and also external demand, we use a triple difference model. We also added the controls in their model in terms of the sales volume, the average price, whether the publisher is a Big Five subsidiary, and the numbers of tourists traveling to that country. To give you a quick look at the results, and on the left side, you see a graphical representation of the amount of book titles that were published before and after Kindle. The blue lines are the differentiators, and the dashed orange line are the non-differentiators. we see a sharp uptake in content production, particularly among the physical differentiators. And when we did a simple diff and diff, it confirms our result that the physical differentiator increased in the production of content by a lot more than the non-physical differentiators. When we run the full regression model, we find support for our conjecture that publishers that are physical differentiators increase the content creation more so than the other publishers in the post-Kindle period. Content cost moderates the degree of content increase, and also customer demand diversity also affect the amount of content increase. Now let's zoom back out and circle back to the question that I asked earlier. How relevant are the classical strategy theories to the digital world? I think this example study that I show give us some evidence that the classical strategy theories are still very applicable in explaining and guiding managerial decisions on digital strategy, the digital age. So while Nathan earlier has argued that digital transformation, journey, new question, and strategy, which does not nicely fit under any traditional strategy theory, here is an example that illustrates that classical strategy theory can still explain quite a bit of managerial decisions and actions in the digital space. Now, to do so, to examine the classical strategy literature theories in digital space, of course, we have to take into different assumptions and constraints given the different contexts. And sometimes these different assumption constraints might push us to rethink the key mechanism that underlies some of the classical theories. But in sum, I can say that the digital transformation and AI gives us a lot of opportunity and also calls us to bridge the classical strategy literature with the digital strategy literature. So I think this is where many spaces are still open for us to make contribution to the strategy literature. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Let me unshare. What is my unshare button? Here we go. Share. Let me see. Not share. Am I good? No, not yet. Stop sharing. Where is my stop sharing screen? Stop sharing. My screen right here. Okay, I'm out. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Richard. So with that, let me open it up to Q&A. If you want to just raise your hand, and I'll kind of moderate the questions, and we can kind of go from there. Yes, Lucy, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Very, very inspiring. Lots of useful information. Thanks, everyone. I have a question about digitization and a lot of public digital data. For example, like remote sensing data, and also like a lot of in the public domain, like geographic information system data. And previously, we would just have like census data, for example, but right now there are a lot of like public data. I know that in the industry, for example, in finance, people use remote sensing data to predict the market, but very, very probably like not that much like in the academia world. And also I'm thinking about like smaller firms, because larger firms, they have a lot of resources and data, but smaller firms like startups, they probably could benefit from those public freely available, those kind of like remote sensing data to change their strategy so that to make them more competitive, because those data are there and they're free. And if a smaller firm can utilize those by changing their strategy, maybe they could be more competitive. So my question is, as a young scholar, is this a good field to explore? And if it is this, is there any kind of research questions that I can think about for the next step? Thank you.
Well, panelists, what do y'all have to say? Let me start out with just kind of a reaction. I mean, I think if you think about some of this type of sensing data, if I understand correctly, it might allow you to gain large scale of information very quickly, right? Question is, how do they make sense of these things? What type of, if you want to connect it to, say, a classic theory about like what Richard is saying, well, what's kind of the learning curve here, in doing this? What are the benefits and trade-offs of trying to get into something like this early so you can maybe build a competency, and is it defensible, right? So I mean, it sounds like anything where there's a new technology where that could be an input to, or a tactic or pillar that could be part of your strategy. There's still this, what we know from classic stuff could tell you quite a bit. There's always this trade-off about being early versus being, a late mover and having maybe better, less uncertainty about how to use these things and stuff. I don't know if the other panelists would like to add some.
Sure, I'll say, I guess I don't have so much familiarity with the data sets that you're speaking about to know entirely like exactly how they could be used. But I guess to the second part of your question about like how you might use them as a scholar, I think Cam's kind of point here of like thinking about, how can we almost starting from like what is the theory, or I guess another way I would put it is like, what is the question that's animating you? I think that tends to be a better, at least for me, a better starting point than just kind of going to the data immediately and like kind of just trying to see the patterns that are there. Like, I think if you can take a question-driven approach and trying to understand like, okay, these are questions I think are interesting, and this data provides me an opportunity, maybe a slightly more structured way of like kind of trying to make sense of this when you have so much information out there to sift through.
Yeah, I echo Manav's point. I remember the old days when I started doing empirical research. One of the challenges I have is, where do I get data? It's just like, where are the data? I want more data. But I think right now when we do research, it's somewhat flip side. We have so much data. How do we begin? And I often go back to what my thesis advisor advised me to do. When you get a new data set, the first thing you do is have a drink with the data. Just go and get to know a little bit more about it, to know the nature of it, know the characteristics of it. And also, building on Cam's point and Manav's point, is what is the question you want to study? What is the theory? And to test this theory, what would be a good research design? Then go to the data. And that way, it will give some guidance on how to organize data. I remember my PhD days, my dissertation is about Chinese satellite TV industry. I got a data set from a proprietary data provider about all the channels, all the shows, all the ratings. It has 8.8 million observations in there. But at the end, to answer my question, I trim it down to under 2,000 observations, because the way I will structure the data, organize it by channels or by time slot or by when and things like that, I don't need to make use of 8.8 million observations. Similarly, the data set that Cam and I worked on, the news and books, can also have tons of data, but at the end, we use a small fraction of it, and we organize it in a very succinct way. And if you see it from the right angle or from theory angle, the effect should be pretty sharp, and you should be able to detect it. So long story short, have a drink with the data, think about your research question, what theory you're going to do, then do the operation on the data. That might be helpful. I hope so.
Thank you so much. Regarding the public data, I think a lot of adjacent disciplines, they use those public data, but they are now doing some research related strategy in firms. So that's why I'm asking, because I see like there are great opportunity, like other adjacent disciplines doing that, but they don't study firm strategy. So that's why I'm asking, as a young scholar, is this a good opportunity for me while I study firms, especially like startup, smaller firms, so that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one other thing, that this might be a reason to think about looking at some of the empirical research in other fields. Not always just for about their question, but what data is available and what are they doing with it? And can you bring your own questions to that and let them help you discover what's there? And obviously good scholars pay very close attention to their data and stuff like that. It might help save you some time navigating the broad search space of everything you could do when you're new, when it's quite hard to say, where should I start? Is there let me ask for another question from the audience. So while people are thinking of one, let me ask Manav a question. I liked how you laid out some of the work, especially some of Joel Wardfolger's work, and that around, digital has multiple effects, both, supply side production, search for demand, things like that. But if you kind of, when I step back and I was thinking about this when I was looking at your slide, if it's easier and cheaper for me to produce something and easier for you as a consumer to find it, that would speak to a much more dynamic competitive landscape where the churn at the top should be higher. And I know you're studying some creative industries. Have you thought a little bit more about that question, and what have you seen?
I haven't. It's a great question. I haven't studied it directly, but my kind of lean would be that you're correct, right? And this is just from like how we see cultural content and cultural industries generally, right? Like I think, there's some sadness in almost saying this, but there seems to be like our attention spans are limited, right? Like even, when I guess Richard was making the point about album covers, becoming less important, like even just this idea that music has moved away, when is the last time most of us have listened to an album from top to bottom versus kind of individual songs kind of becoming, their own products in and of themselves. And so this is something I am really interested in studying, and we can definitely talk more about this offline too, Cam, because I do think like there likely is more of this market churn happening as digitization picks up, but it becomes hard to pick up because like with many of these questions that we're talking about here, it's happening universally, right? And it's happening on both the demand and the supply side. And so disentangling these kind of competing forces can become, so challenging. But I would suspect your intuition is right. Like I would think that we would see kind of shorter product life cycles in creative industries and other industries as well.
Right, and I think it's interesting because you have that maybe going on within some categories, but on the other side, you have the platforms that might tip to winner take all with strong network effects under certain conditions, where you have two opposite things going on: lots of dynamics, and what might be a little bit more of a static state.
Definitely, and I think there's sorry, Richard, I'll just finish my point. I think there's a opportunity here in some ways to try and put some sort of framework around this, like this idea of this, we have all this literature on the long tail, and then as you mentioned, we have this literature on platforms and superstar effects, and I think trying to find a way to understand like when do we see one versus the other. I think there's some research that's out there that's starting to lay this out, but there's a lot of room, I think, to build on that.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me of the book by Richard Case back in 2000s called Creative Industry. And one way he characterized creative industry is the nobody knows characteristic. That means even industry insider, those with a lot of experience, when they see a product, they might be saying that, oh yes, this should be a hit, but actually at the end, nobody knows whether it's going to be a hit or not. So there's some kind of randomness in drawing what are the good products or not. I think Joel Wardfolger did a work on when more people contribute to creation music, if there are some elements of randomness in there, the more drawn from the urn, the more likely that we'll hit some good songs or good books or good movies out there. So in this, lowering the cost of production and encouraging more entrants in there, the quality of music or songs could still be very high. I think there was a study that he did on looking at the quality of songs based on the awards they won. Do the random songs that generated from the long tail also win those Song of the Year, Record of the Year awards?
Any other questions from the audience?
I think David has one.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
I just realized that my raised hand looks exactly like my background. Thanks for the presentations. I found them really interesting. The question about really researching AI, and in particular generative AI, I guess a lot of research we do, we use historical data sets, so we're able to look at some nice span of time and see how things evolved. And one thing that's different about generative AI is how fast it's moving right now. And that's maybe something that's put me off a little bit, trying to even keep track of it. So working in that space, do you ever get the feeling that it's moving too fast to keep a track of? And how should that affect how we try and do research on it?
I can, yeah, I can take a first pass at this. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I do feel like it moves really fast, and I think that's a challenge. I think I feel like the way I respond to that is twofold. One, and when I'm writing papers and when we're trying to interpret whatever results we're doing, we do spend a lot of time trying to think about, what is actually generalizable here and what is an artifact of GPT 3.0 versus 3.5 versus whatever is coming, 2 years down the line, right? And some of that is speculation, right? Some of that is us trying to kind of evaluate what we think is happening based on our own common sense. Some of that is also trying to draw from what do we already know, right? Like, in drawing from kind of the patterns and like the theories that already exist out there, how do we think what we're finding correlates to that? I think the other thing that I've felt that has been necessary in some ways is if I want to study this kind of fast moving new phenomenon, is to like change the toolkit I use in some ways. So as you mentioned, right, like archival data becomes challenging. Like if we have to wait 5 years to have like a long time span of Gen AI adoption and then study things in the future, by the time all that stuff gets published, we might be at AGI or something, and everything that we've written might be kind of irrelevant. So, I mean, while still understanding these things take longer, I've increasingly tried to embrace things like experimental settings as well, where we can move a little bit faster and try and extract something. And obviously the research process is still slow, but it may kind of allow us to generate some insights, at least for some of the questions that are suitable for those kind of settings, while we wait and while we kind of allow this data to kind of be accumulated and catch up.
Yeah, David, thank you for the question. I'm not the fastest researcher. One of my colleagues comments on me, say speed is not my virtue. So when I start to do research on things that change it a lot, that poses a big challenge for me as an individual researcher. But as a field, if we can get more people doing research in it, it's a field that is not one researcher doing all the research. It's everybody do a collective body of research. And if we see more young scholars, PhD students engaging in this research, but together, you can focus on topic, they can focus on another topic. Together as a field, we might still be able to catch up and see more of what's going on with AI in there. So I would take it from the angle of the field, the strategy field, not just individual researchers. And I think today's AOM topic, this virtual panel, hopefully is an effort towards that goal, to have more people look at AI together so we can try our best to catch up with the technology change.
Thanks.
I'm going to surface a question from the chat, and it could still be hard for PhD candidates to find appropriate theories explain, like, say, interactions between AI and other variables. Would there be a way to find the proper theories in the context of AI, comparatively? So, let me start. And, Manav and Richard, y'all jump in. Feel free, the crowd as well. I think one thing, and Richard touched upon this, and it's also a little bit at the heart of what Nathan was saying, if you really think about it, is that there's going to be, if you have a phenomenon, so we want to study how AI affects X. Well, let's say if it wasn't AI, if there's something else similar to that, what theory might you already use, right? And if you really know that theory, you might start to see, well, all right, in the context of AI, maybe it is, maybe this theory still applies, but needs to be refined, right? So I think some people might be struggling saying, exactly the way this theory was laid out in my syllabus or my, kind of strategy content type PhD seminar, it's not a perfect match. But if you start to really look at it, you may say, well, this mechanism, which was really true in this context, maybe no longer applies. But this other one, which was kind of minor, gets accentuated or something like that. So when you say find proper theories, it's hard to answer that outright. But what I would say is you need to maybe look deeply into one, and you may see that as you kind of accentuate some mechanisms, reduce others, add a boundary condition that maybe hadn't been there before, it's really tweaking these theories to apply could really be helpful. Not saying that's going to be 100% R squared, but it's going to get you could get you some traction. And if it fails, then we know maybe it'll help you hunt where should a new theory begin. I know what the other panelists saying.
I completely agree. I mean, I think I view that as a feature rather than a bug, right? In some ways, if the existing theories told us everything that we needed to know, like there'd be little value in doing this other than just like documenting facts. So I completely agree. Like the path I would generally lean towards is like try to find analogies, but like it's great when we don't necessarily find things that line up exactly as we might expect, and it's important to kind of try and outline, where there might be kind of these new wrinkles or new twists.
Well, one way I do it is I have my favorite set of theories to focus and do deep dives on. And when I develop my expertise in that set of theories or that arena, and I would try to see if those theories can explain what I see is happening in the digital space in AI. And if I find that there is some gap, that means that what we know right now is not complete. There are gaps in this theory. Then we think deeper into that space. So what the question seems to me is like a problem solution pairing kind of thing, or problem two sets pairing. As you develop into a more mature scholar, you have the toolkits that you are expert in. And you try to use those toolkits to explain certain things with the goal of not trying to cover it, but at the same time, understanding what are the shortcomings, what are the gaps. From that angle, there's room for development, the theory, and push the theory further. And that's how I would look at the problem toolkits kind of matching phenomenon.
I would urge some of you that if you're kind of, especially younger scholars, take a look at some of the stuff that's just been published over the last couple of years. Like I'll give you an example of a paper that's not, so look at some stuff like Manav's done, David Clough, and you have a really nice paper from a couple of years ago that it can give you kind of a template to think about that. One that's more recent that just came out that I like, David Chung, Maggie Zhu, and Christina Choi. I like this paper, where they're looking at Uber, right? But if you go into it, you can see how they extend to some new theoretical insights. They're streaming from the idea that it's these platforms, but they're not starting from brand new scratch. Like we don't have any theory. They already kind of go into it through a well-known idea, but they make a pretty big impact with that. So it gives you some of these, all of them doing it a different way. We can kind of give you a template, I think, to these are good approaches that you can get a paper to a place like SMJ or management science or org science with.
Well, building
So
on top of that, another
go
example
ahead.
another example I can think of is the paper by Brian Wu, by Tobias Greshmer, Deepak Somaya, and by Gigi. So that looks at RBV. That's go back to one of the most classical theory is RBV, resource-based view, and explain why some of the digital companies that we see today are hyper focused and hyper big, super sized but super focused. And the underlying theory in that paper goes back to, I think, the early work that Brian Wu has done is about resource space, about scalability, and about opportunity cost. And he used the opportunity cost, which has written quite a lot about back in his earlier days, to explain what's going on in those digital firms. Why are they super focused? Why are they super big? And I think that is one way that you can leverage what you know very deeply about certain area of theory and try to explain what's going on or what might happen in the digital and AI space.
Well, everyone, I think we're kind of hitting our time limit here at 12:15. So I want to thank everyone for coming. Panelists, Richard, Manav, Nathan, though he's not here, everybody asked questions. I really appreciate it. We're going to have this recorded and we'll have it up on the STR site. So if you missed something, you want to go back to it, we're happy to have that. If you have any questions or if you're looking for something, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to give you a thought or two. All right. Thank you all very much. Panelists, thank you very much. And have a great day.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank you.
See you at the conference in July.